Good morning. Oh, you guys are so welcoming. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever experienced the crunching of ice beneath your vehicle on an ice road? Oh, there's a few. Have you ever taken an ice boat? Ice boat, geez, we've been reading the Hardy Boys. I don't even know what an ice boat is. An airboat to get to your day's work. Okay. Perhaps some of you have started a new job and it's been terribly overwhelming, or you found yourself staying in a place that was new and unfamiliar and strange and caused you a little bit of anxiety, or perhaps it took everything out of you to courageously get out of bed. Yeah, I have been in all of those places. My name is Chantal and I'm on the teaching team. I want to tell you a little bit about what the last 10 months has looked like for me. You will see a few pictures about that. I have had the honor of delivering clinical services in Manitoba's only school system under First Nations jurisdiction. It is the first of its kind in Canada. It means that First Nations students, for the first time ever, receive funding at par to provincial students. So it's been my job as the supervising school psychologist, along with 2 other dedicated school psychologists, that's what my vehicle looks like all the time now, to develop our side of the department or the system from the ground up. So that means we've done everything from create clinical forms, clinical files, reporting templates, a test library, and a host of other needed processes before we could even begin work in community. So it also means that for the first time ever, First Nations students, like every other student in this province, can receive consistent clinical services in the schools in which they attend and not travel to Winnipeg to get them. That is a miracle. So to serve in this position has required me to take ice roads, gravel roads, float planes, helicopters, airboats, all to trailers and motels and schools hundreds of kilometers from home almost every single week. But it has also required that I tend to my typically anxious heart. And I know this is for me. Now, there are nerves that you would expect from boarding a small float plane that has to fly below the clouds and you're watching the horizon play seesaw the whole time. There are some natural anxieties from commuting across an ice road that has just recently been flooded to thicken it so that the semis can deliver needed supplies in the future to the communities, and that's the ice that's breaking below your vehicle. That would have been really nice to know when I was clutching my colleague's arm in a death grip, and I didn't really know her all that well. So that's the type of fear that I expected to have to manage, but I know I'm not the only person here who's felt a panic that seems to surge from apparently nowhere. See, at the start of this year in my position, I had my first and only panic attack, and it was in front of all my brand new colleagues. Then on my first 3-day road trip, I didn't want to do that. On my first 3-day road trip away from home, we had arrived at the motel for the night and preparing for bed, and suddenly my heart started racing, and it actually hurt, and I suddenly became of all the difficulties that lay ahead. And part of me wondered, okay, is this what Peter felt like when he started sinking after walking on water? Because part of me is just going like, what am I doing? And how am I here? And how am I here? I started sinking and spiraling in fear as well. I fumbled with my earbuds, and thankfully I had some worship music downloaded onto my phone, and I used that many evenings. It was the antidote that I needed to adore God's presence in my very real and present anxiety. So the position itself is daunting, as you can imagine, but I want to say that the difficulties that I experienced only speak to the resilience of those who live in places that most of us have never heard of, let alone stepped foot in. So make no mistake, I do not speak for First Nations, but I speak in support of. In my current position, I am an ally, not an authority. Now, you might not be in a first of its kind of project. You might not take a helicopter to work, but I am convinced that you and I take the same risks every day. We dare to unfurl and breathe in today. Now, about a month ago, I asked for what I consider to be an emergency meeting with John. John is the lead pastor, about today. Because when you're typically anxious, a month away from the deadline is kind of like an emergency. But here's what I told him. I said, John, I grew up afraid. In fact, I grew up absolutely terrified. I never broke a rule because I was terrified of being criticized. So I did everything that I could to be perfect. I got straight A's and I never talked back. The problem was also, though, that I didn't express myself. I didn't say a whole lot. I simply followed directions. I was such a robot, in fact, that when I was put into baseball at about 7 or 8, I was very nervous. And all I kept telling myself, just follow what the girl ahead of you did, all right? So I got up there, I watched her bat and swing, and I got up. I said, okay, I'm on the same side of the plate she is, which would be fine if that was the side that I swung from. But I wasn't. And I'm like, man, this doesn't look right at all. But when you're anxious, it always never looks right, and you kind of get used to that, and you just keep pressing on. I was committed. I was staying on this side. Coach comes out, puts me on the other side. Okay, that looks better. I mean, I feel mortified, but it looks better. I said, and you know what else, John? When I switched from French immersion to English school, I didn't talk in class. Later in my teens, my usual straight A's fell as I skipped school to sleep, and I stressed with stomach aches about my new after-school job, which I had to take out of necessity. I delayed getting my driver's license. I lost a significant amount of weight. I was not healthy. And if I needed to make an appointment by phone, here's what I had to do. I had to script out what I was going to say, and then I had to script out ahead of time what all of their possible responses were going to be, and then script out all of my responses in anticipation of their possible responses. My worst fear, actually, was making a purchase in a store. And I know some of you know me now, and you think that's pretty ironic, but it's funny now. It wasn't funny then. This was a totally irrational fear, but fears often are. So this is a fear of looking stupid. So this is a social anxiety. I was not diagnosed. I just sort of figured this out through my profession. A social anxiety for fear of being judged by others, especially around your performance. But I was overwhelmed by the what-ifs in the public sphere of going to the store and buying something. Here's how it went. What if I had to ask where to find the item? Well, then I would risk looking stupid in front of the clerk that I needed to ask, especially if the item was right at where I was looking. What if they didn't carry the item? Well, then I would have to leave and go somewhere else and risk looking stupid there. And because I typically froze when people often expected a verbal response from me, I was terrified of how stupid I would look to the people in line behind me if the cashier actually said something to me. And John, I said, there's more. When my now husband and I, David, were dating, we would talk on the phone. But really this just meant that he waited on the other end of the line while I gathered my thoughts and then said very few of them. For hours at a time, there would be dead silence between us. I remember that I couldn't eat in front of him. I couldn't blow my nose in front of him. And when we got married, I couldn't even say a thank you speech, which forced David is 37. I'm 37 too. I'm not calling him out. It's the only day in his life that he lost his voice. It was the day that we got married. And he had to speak for both of us because I was too afraid. Good man, good man. So for all of these reasons, honestly, I find the prospect of me standing here, let alone teaching anyone anything, incredibly humbling. But I also find it very miraculous. See, my conversation with John was based on the fear, again, that I wasn't qualified enough, brave enough, confident enough, in other words, that I wasn't enough, and I almost backed out. Have you ever felt this way? You wanted to give up on a commitment you made? So you might see only me standing here, but know this, I did not do this by myself. I did not get here on my own. So with that in mind today, I'm going to offer you 3 questions to ask in how we can all stand tall and not alone. So the 3 questions are, am I saving myself? Am I trying to save, fill in the blank, by myself? And am I serving myself? So we're going to go through these. Now, if you haven't been here for the last couple of weeks, we're going through Ephesians. Today we're going through Ephesians 4, 1 through 16. These are the house Bibles. If you would like a house Bible, you can raise your hand and someone will get you one. In the house Bibles, we are on page 1175. So we're actually going to start right at the beginning at verse 1. So Paul is writing from prison, and he seems to beg us pretty urgently as followers of Christ to do something which sounds like a lot of pressure. It sounds epic. This is what he says. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Now, when I read the Bible, what I often do actually is I touch the words almost by osmosis. I just want them to soak into me. But I also read other versions. So we're going to look at the Message of this section. Now, the Message is not a literal translation. It is a paraphrase. But I like how he phrases it. He says, in light of all this, here's what I want you to do. While I'm locked up here, a prisoner for the master, I want you to get out there and walk. Better yet, run on the road God has called you to travel. I don't want any of you sitting around on your hands. I don't want anyone strolling off down some path that goes nowhere. And mark that you do this with humility and discipline, not in fits and starts, but steadily, pouring yourselves out for each other in acts of love, alert at noticing differences and quick at mending fences. So we're going to look at this first question about standing tall and not alone. Am I saving myself? Here's how I viewed it. Have you ever heard a trainer at the gym or on a video for exercise say, give it all you've got, don't save anything, lay it all out there? This is what he's asking. He's saying, am I saving my energy for my own thing? That is, have I avoided the things that make me uncomfortable so that I stroll on a safer and easier journey? Am I serving in fits and starts because I'm saving part of myself out of a scarcity of my time, my energy, my ability, or maybe my disability? Paul is asking us to live differently as Christians, that our goals become shared and common, that we reorder our lives so we are not serving out of our leftover time, but that it becomes the thing around which we arrange our activities and our leisure. So that sounds like hard work. It probably is prime ground for discontent, stress, and conflict. And keeping the peace is not about an absence of problems, and it's not about sweeping things under the rug. But it is about putting our shoulders under each other and bearing the collective course of difficulty. So we fix our eyes on the depth and breadth and width of God, which we learned about in chapter 3, because he is more than able to handle our disagreements, including our denominational disagreements. This is why and how we may serve in and outside of the church well. We train ourselves in disciplined cooperation and consistency. Let's go on to the next section. Paul explains that we've all been given a standard of grace. So we're going to start at verse 7. Back on page 1175, Paul is bringing up a psalm to describe how it came to be that we were all given a measure of grace. Verse 7. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. That's in quotes. That's the part he's referencing to a psalm. What does he ascended mean, except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. So to understand this a little bit, we're going to go back to the psalm that Paul is referencing, which is Psalm 68:18 in the house Bibles. It's on page 575. We're going to stretch it a bit and look at the verses around it. Starting at 17, this is what it says. The chariots of God are tens of thousands and thousands of thousands. The Lord has come from Sinai into his sanctuary. When you ascended on high, you took many captives. You received gifts from people, even the rebellious. That you, Lord God, may dwell there. Praise be to the Lord God, our Savior, who daily bears our burdens. Our God is a God who saves. From the sovereign Lord comes escape from death. Now you notice here that it says you received gifts from the people. In Hebrew, there's an idiom. This is where my nerdiness shows. In Hebrew, there's an idiom where receive and give are actually interchangeable. So Paul is bringing up an emotional memory here, something that the readers of this letter would have been very familiar with. The purpose is to bring a sense of corporate worship, to bring confidence for the future. It raises images of kings who would have taken a conquered people captive, and in front of them, given the spoils of their country to the soldiers who helped the king subdue them. Total exclusiveness there. What Christ did, however, was take captivity captive. He turned it on its head by giving gifts and grace to every one of us, even those of us who rise up against him, and we are all guilty of that. Only he saves because he gives not what we deserve, but what we could never earn. This is better than Oprah saying, and a car for you, and a car for you, and a car for everybody. This is Paul saying, and grace for you, and grace for you, and grace for you, Chantal, and grace for everybody. So this brings us to the second question we must ask ourselves on Standing Tall and Not Alone. Am I trying to save by myself? Am I trying to save the day by myself, this project? Am I trying to save my whole industry by myself? Am I trying to save this relationship by myself? In other words, am I placing my identity in my own productivity? Now, have you ever stressed about leaving work to go on vacation? Or in your anticipation of a medical leave or maternity leave, rush about trying to get all the ends tied up so that you can leave work with some kind of peace of mind? And isn't it humbling to discover that actually when you're gone, things kind of roll along as if they always did, even if you weren't there, right? Even those you disagree with or you think they're not pulling their own weight, they have some sense of their responsibilities. And your boss doles out a genuine gratitude to all for a job done, even if it wasn't perfect. So let's think about it this way. What is the difference between going into an important meeting and visiting someone at home? It's your shoes. Because in someone else's home, you take your shoes off. You bring yourself down under their roof into a place of submission and respect. But in an important meeting, maybe at the bank or with your boss, we tend to have on our most formal or expensive or newest or our tallest shoes, right? We're trying to bring just ourselves up in a really superficial way. But in a friend's home, by connecting to the earthiness of our commonality, by crowding around a meal or crouching around a broken heart, that's where we help each other stand tall. I learned it is customary to remove your shoes when you enter a First Nations school. And if you ever want to be reminded of the equal ground on which we stand and get gut-checked toward a tendency of title and position, think about what your response would be in a situation if you didn't have your shoes on, if you had your slippers on. Does the value of what I say have a different weight now that I don't have my shoes on? You might say no. But why do we have a derogatory saying about women being at home barefoot and pregnant? What's the barefoot part about? It's interesting. Our personal humility is the lowering of ourselves to honor others. It makes a space between a response and a reaction in a situation where we can say and hear the hard things by replanting our identity in the saving grace of Christ for all of us. So this is the last question we need to ask, and it's a hard one. Am I serving myself? We're going to go back to page 1175 to Ephesians 4, and we're going to look at verse 11. Paul says, "So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach the unity in the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ." The King James Version for verse 12, where it says here to equip his people, it actually says for the perfecting of the saints. Now, someone who's typically anxious and prone to perfectionism, this had a lot to say to me. Perfecting in this context actually means the mending of what is broken and the completing of what is unfinished. So notice that it is only after Paul states the corporate gift of grace does he go into the individual spiritual gifts. God has poured himself into all of us. There is a peace in that. Do you feel the release of pressure? I'm living this right now. God has already equipped you and me. The question is, to whose benefit are we using it? So a commentary that I came across says this: worldly people inquire for good, not the chief good. All they want is outward good, present good, partial good, good meat, good drink, a good trade, and good estate. But what are all these worth? Any good will serve the turn of most men, but a gracious soul will not be put off so. Grace again. That means that we're not going to settle for individual, tangible good, but to seek the intangible of more than what we could hope for or dream of, and that is whole connections, restored relationships in our friendship, city, and world. It is for that reason that we come to know each other's strengths and weaknesses in accountability, so that we can equip each other. And remember, that means to mend what is broken and to complete what is unfinished. Not for the chief good, not just for our own good. For me, practically, this is what it means. When I'm most offended and having difficulty with others, it's usually during a period of time that I'm not grounded in God every day. That I haven't gone outside, I haven't eaten well, I haven't rested well. And that's when my disconnect becomes obvious to others. I challenge and correct them, I don't look them in the eye, I insulate myself from people, I go back to the kid that I was. Now, you've heard it said on Instagram that you should only have people in your life that make you feel good. Paul, on the other hand, says that we equip each other by suffering alongside each other. An obsolete definition of passion is suffering, the state or experience of one that suffers, especially for someone or something to which they are devoted. That is why it is called the Passion of the Christ during Easter or Holy Week. A priest describes compassion this way. Compassion, which means literally to suffer with, is the way to the truth that we are most ourselves, not when we differ from others, but when we are the same. Indeed, the main spiritual question is not what difference do you make, but what do you have in common? It is not excelling, but serving that makes us most human. It is not proving ourselves to be better than others, but by confessing to be just like others. That is the way to healing and reconciliation. It means that here, the musicians and the pastors and us as a congregation, we are going to give it all that we've got, for sure. We're going to accept imperfection, 100% we're going to accept imperfection. But we're also going to confess our inadequate independence. So a few years ago, I took a certificate entry-level course in expressive arts therapy. I like to practice holistically and a little bit out there. When it was my turn, near the end of the term, to lead the group in an exercise, I asked my group to walk outside for several minutes and study the trees, in which there weren't any leaves on the trees yet. I asked them to draw their lifeline, that is, their life's experience as if it were a tree. In a circle, we each shared why we had drawn what we did. There's a picture of mine somewhere. There it is. To me, this represented at the time how much of my life I had felt on my own. I have paid my dues, some of which you have heard here today. I have shed tears and shook with anger at the unfairness of what my life has looked like at times. But I have also hung on to owed debts by others. I have thwarted forgiveness. I have had professional moments, that I just wished I could take back. I have failed to measure up. And as I prepared to explain my tree and talk about the meaning behind the branches, I was fumbling with it and realized that I'd had it upside down. Once it was upside down, it actually could be mistaken as the root system. That was very powerful to me. Whereas I was focused on what had happened to me, what was happening in me was the lesson that I needed to attend to. So I stand here before you now because of the people who kept showing up for me. And there's way more of them than I deserve. What if we stripped away our position and productivity? Would we honor others above ourselves by planting down beside them and being humbled? Would we ground ourselves in the reality that we need each other, especially those who challenge us? We need them because they help us to be pruned as people in need of grace too. Will we ask ourselves these questions? Am I trying to save something by myself? Am I saving myself for my own thing or my own comfort? And am I serving my own good? Did anyone plant a tree this spring. Tell me what speaks of more faith in the future than the planting of a tree. The size of it doesn't matter, the kind of it doesn't matter, even the place of it doesn't matter. We only plant a tree if we have hope for the future. We only plant a tree if we expect maturity. And we only plant a tree if we believe that our efforts belong to something that extends beyond ourselves.
So let me just say, wow, we have such an encouraging community. There's so many questions, and I don't think we have time for them all, but I just thank you for being so encouraging. So you should know Chantal.
Thank you.
Just people are really blessed by your talk today. So the first question is a bit personal,
okay.
and I think you're quite qualified to speak to this. So it goes like this. My teenage daughter has social anxiety. It can be so exhausting as a mother. What can I do to support her?
Great question. And I would say, just from my profession, anxiety is one of the most common issues for students today, so there's some comfort in knowing it's not ever just you on your own. But as a parent, I would enlist the help of the people around you. So people who around you are familiar with anxiety and have developed some strategies that help them, I would enlist their help. It may also mean enlisting the help of people who are professionals, so that, unlike me, they don't have to figure it out on their own. So I would encourage that as well. But also as a parent, I would say, what is one of the most empowering and therapeutic interventions is actually just being with. And so there's a lot of work and knowledge we have around validating feelings. It's our natural inclination as parents, and I do this too. We want to get in there and solve it right away, and we say things like, oh, don't worry about it, when in fact that can skyrocket the anxiety because we're invalidating that they feel anxious. And so then I remember as a kid feeling like, oh, well then I'm anxious because I shouldn't be feeling anxious. Whereas we go alongside and say, yeah, and we're looking at the problem together. I could see how that would be anxiety provoking. I could see how that would make you feel nervous. And that way you're joining forces right away and looking at the problem external to the child. And so, I don't know, those are a couple things I would start with. But yeah, being with and validating is really, really powerful.
Okay, next question. Chantal, thank you so much for your message today. You said that we need each other in relationship. Does this mean that I have to be fully vulnerable in all my relationships?
Okay, no. You would never be able to manage that, okay? You would be so overwhelmed. What it means is using judgment in the relationships in which you can be fully vulnerable and those in which you can't. So we have over 40 muscles in the face. We use all of them in different combinations to make a variety of facial expressions. We wouldn't just talk about being happy and using that in all contexts. Same thing with relationships. We need people in our lives who know all of our flaws and vulnerabilities and love us anyway. We need people in our lives who know a few of our flaws and vulnerabilities and tell us about them. And then we need a few people in our lives who know few of our flaws and vulnerabilities and just let us be. So, put the people in your sphere, a mix of those. We don't want to go to the extreme and have only people that are yes people around us, because that's not healthy for us either. But you would never be able to be fully vulnerable with everybody that you meet. It just isn't. It isn't part of our makeup.
How does serving myself look different than self-care?
Oh, okay, this is a good question. Okay, well, it's a good question in the way that I've thought about it, but I think some of these are discussion. What I feel like self-care is very important, and I don't want to downplay that. I'm naturally an introvert. We're kind of homebodies. We stick around home a lot. And so to me, that's my self-care. Like after today, I'm going to have some quiet time at home in the evening. But also I think we overemphasize self-care because we are doing our own thing so much. So in an individualistic culture where everything is about our own personal goals, then you do need more self-care because you're relying on yourself solely. You're purely independent. Whereas if we relied on each other a little bit more, you actually wouldn't need as much emphasis on self-care. Again, I don't want to say we don't need self-care, but it's just a matter of how we interpret interdependence or independence, and then what we do as a result of that. Because you'd be exhausted if you constantly had to only rely on yourself to accomplish everything you were accomplishing. Then you would need only purely self-care. But it's a discussion, I think, yeah.
Okay, this one it's a bit of a tough one, I'll say.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw it your way, though. It's kind of a tough one. It goes like this. How can we clarify and differentiate ourselves from the distorted version of Christianity that's defining itself south of the border, while still saying we need each other?
Yeah. I guess it depends what we're placing a priority on. So and how big do we think God is? I feel like if we believe God is big enough, that we don't necessarily need the types of self-protection and rhetoric that we're hearing maybe south of the border. I think it depends on our view of God and how much we feel like we're here to serve or to be self-served. So when I hear things like, this country, number one always, it just makes me wonder, is that a true Christian perspective, or is that a blend of something that's a bit more self-serving? I don't know. Tough one, yeah.
Okay, last question today.
Oh my gosh, okay. The sweater was a bad idea.
Take a break, yeah. Just talk amongst yourselves. I've been hurt by other Christians. How can I trust them again, feel like I'm safe in community?
Okay, I have too been hurt by other Christians, Christian teachers, Christian clinicians, in my work, in my day-to-day living, but I have also done the hurting as well. I really believe firmly now this has taken me decades to really come to this place, and I'm still learning, right? But as I mentioned, I feel the most hurt when I have not been planting myself in my everyday. So the people that challenge me the most, I find actually, if I rephrase it, okay, what is it about them that's hurting me right now that actually might be a reflection of what I'm afraid of myself, in myself? And so sometimes that's actually what our reaction is from. And so I feel like if we use the things that God has given to us to replant ourselves, one of them is being in His Word every day, and other things are reconnecting with His creation. So we know, like in the science out there, that we should be outside more often, and we should be eating better, and we should be resting. That's all reconnecting to how our body was made and how the earth was made. And so I feel like, yes, we do hurt each other, and this is the part where we need to be in positions where there are people in our lives who can tell us about it, and say and hear the hard things, and work together to moving forward. And I know that that really sounds like rose-colored glasses, but I'm really learning, I don't know if this is a thing, but like Christ-colored glasses? I don't want that to be like a thing where people actually buy Christ-colored. I don't know what that would look like. But
available at the info center.
But it's to putting a space between, so this happened to me, and what is my reaction going to be? If we just put a pause in there and figure out how we can reconnect to Christ first. And there is a response that is needed, right? Again, I'm not saying that we're going to sweep things under the rug when people do hurt us. I think there is a place, and people who know me know that, like, I'm pretty good at, like, calling things out, right? Like, I am, when John talked about 2 feet of, like, truth and grace, I lean pretty heavily on the truth side, and I'm really working on regaining my balance on the grace side. So response is definitely necessary. I just think how we do it and how we reconnect to Christ first before we do that. There will be hurt, there will be suffering. This is what we've been promised, that it's going to be a tough go, and we are human and we are going to hurt each other, and that is just the reality of how it goes. I think we can make it, we could turn the challenge into something that changes us well. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Oh. Thank you. thank you for getting out of bed and being here. I would like to send you off with a blessing, and I think I have it on my phone because I can't memorize these things. All right. From Numbers 6. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. There will be people here to pray if you would like to talk with somebody. Otherwise, go with God this week.